Hello everybody, welcome back. In this video, let's quickly take a look at what is at the rate toString annotation, which is one of the handy annotation that is provided by Lombok. So in order to demo it, let's quickly create a package. And let us also create a class to see the demo. Okay, so we have a Java class. So whenever we have a class and if we want to see the state during the execution, we can put a debugger point and debug the current state of the class and its field values. So toString will help us to quickly see the state to understand what are the initializations of the fields. So let's quickly take a look. Let's write a sample non-static variables. Public string name. Let's also have similar variables what we have earlier. Okay, so we have three class level variables which are non-static, and if we wanted to see the state of these variables, how do we do that? So before we initialize some values to the class level variables, let's annotate with at the rate getter and at the rate setter. So these annotations we have already taken a look in the previous video. Okay, so now let's quickly create an object. All right, so now we have created the object, and let us say dot set name, set age, set minor. Okay, so we did set all the values, and if we want to print the current state of this toString example object, how do we do that? So one way that we can do is sysout and toString. So let's quickly run and see what is the output. Okay, so when we print the reference of the object that we have created, we are only seeing some hash code value showing up here, but technically we are not seeing the state of this object, right? So if we wanted to do that, if we wanted to see the state, how do we do that? So we put a debugger point and let's run the application in a debug mode, and the execution should stop at that point. Yeah, and if we take a look at the class now, we see the name has been initialized with Brand, age is 33 and minor is false. But how do we do it in the form of console outputs instead of putting a debugger and stopping the execution and seeing the values? So one quick way is to make use of toString method. So toString is technically an object class method where we can override and we can implement our own way of showing up the object state. So let's quickly do that. How do we do it? Public string toString, and every class is by default internally extending with object class. So we should be able to override the object class methods, which is toString. And what I would like to implement is I wanted to return what is the name, and what is the age, and what is the minor status. So minor, I would like to say this dot minor. So this toString method will help us to see the object state. Now let's quickly go back and call the toString method. So let's rerun the application. Okay, let's continue execution. All right. So now when you see on the console, we can see the name is Brand, age is 33, and the minor is false. Where we are able to see the state of the object using toString method. But let us say this class might have 100 fields, or like 50 fields. Like there are n number of fields, and preparing the toString method manually is a big challenge for us, right? So it's not that easy to concatenate the strings and show up the object state. So in order to avoid that, Lombok came up with a annotation toString. So when you simply specify at the rate toString, and let's call the toString method, and let's rerun. All right, so now we see a console statement which is showing up a clear description of what class it is and what are the parameters and what are their values in the console log statement, which is very helpful. So we don't need to manually go ahead and write the toString overridden implementation. So simply adding at the rate toString will help us to see the object state wherever we want. So now we have three non-static class variables, and whenever we do at the rate toString, we see that all the non-static variables are being printed. But what happens if we have a static variable? Let us change this minor to be static variable, and let's rerun the code. Okay, so by default I'm making it as false, and now let's rerun the code and see what happens to non-static fields. Okay, so now if you see, the toString is printing only name and age. It is not printing minor anymore, because the toString by default prints all the non-static variables of a class. It doesn't print a static fields or static variables, right? So what to do in order to include such kind of static fields in toString? So there is another option available. So toString dot include. So when we manually specify toString dot include, now we can see the output once again. All right, now we see minor is being printed. So this is how we can include static fields which are not as part of toString by default. Okay, and what happens when a class is extending a superclass, and its superclass also has some fields, and you also wanted to show up those fields in your toString implementation? So let's take a look at that scenario. Let's create a new class, toString superclass. Okay, and let's create a field here, public string. Let's say version equal to first, and let's say this class also have toString method. And now let's extend our toString example class with toString superclass, which is having one non-static field, which is version. And now let's run our code once again. So when we run, we still see name, age, and minor is being printed. But however, the extended class, the super class fields are not being shown up in the toString method, right? So how do we include them? So toString call super true. So when we put this attribute call super, now we can see the super class is being printed, and as well as we are seeing the super class properties and values. So this is how we call superclass constructor and show up the values of superclass in toString. And there are some other important attributes that we can use. One is include field names. So by default, we are seeing what is the field name, right? So name, age, and minor, all these are field names. If you want to turn them off, if you specify include field names to be false, now we don't see any field names. We only see the values of that particular field. But yeah, by default, turning it on would be helpful because we can clearly see the field names as well. Yep. And one last thing is we can specify only explicitly included to be true. So whenever I say only explicitly included to be true, now when I run it, I don't see the name and age. I only see the minor value being shown up because I'm saying that whatever are explicitly included, only include those things into the toString. So these two fields doesn't have, or they doesn't explicitly include it. So we need to do that. Include and include. When I do this, I can see all the names being, all the fields being coming up in the toString method. I hope this helps. Thank you. See you in the next video.